I'm so happy to be included in this White Hot Wines series. Laura, she is a Harvard and Stanford trained physician and really, truly one of the most important voices in wine today. She's led Catena Zapata to global recognition. The brand has been named one of the most admired wine brands globally by Drinks International in 2025, and she's also the author of three books. So today I'm super excited to talk about a side of Catena that really deserves more attention, which is its long history with Chardonnay and how that history connects really with what consumers are looking for today. So Laura, such a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Corinne and Erica. So, yeah, most people today think of Argentina and Malbec, but actually, when my father in the 80s sort of came up with this idea of doing the Napa thing with Argentina, saying, okay, Judgment of Paris, Napa is competing with the Grand Crus of the world, the Chardonnay, Judgment of Paris, the Cabernet blends. My dad said, I'm going to do this in Argentina. And he basically says he got lucky because honestly, he might have gone back to Argentina and we didn't have the climate and the soil and the characteristics, but we have this high altitude climate where we can pretty much match a particular variety to soil and climate because at every altitude you have a different climate. So you go from the south of France to Champagne, which is about a 7-hour drive in France, within 45 minutes because of the altitude. So super interesting. But to answer your question, when my father first released wines to the world, it was actually a Chardonnay and a Cabernet under the Catena label because he wanted to first prove to the world that he could make a great Chardonnay. And so, at the origin of Catena, even before Catena Malbec being exported, we had the Chardonnay and Cabernet. And, my mother, who was actually the one who traveled the world because my dad's a bit shy and my mother is not shy at all. And she was actually running her business, but my dad asked her, and she would go and taste blind in the early 90s a Chardonnay from Catena and a Chardonnay from either Burgundy or California. And she claims that our wine always won. And actually, I've heard a couple of people tell me this story that it's actually true that our Chardonnay won, and that's why they listed it. So yeah, there's a lot more, but I'm kind of answering your question of why we have this long history with Chardonnay. And we also have a long history with white wines in general. So, in the 1960s and 70s, our family's been making wine since 1902. We actually produced between, around 70% of our wine was white. So, my grandfather, my great grandfather, my father were making more white wine than red wine.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating to think that Chardonnay was really one of the wines that helped open the doors for
Yeah,
Catena in the
right?
US. So I want to make
Yeah.
sure that we have people sipping
Yes.
here and tasting these wines. Well,
Yeah.
I have just gotten to taste through the Catena Alta Chardonnay. It's a 2023. And so I think let's all give it a swirl and a
Yeah.
sniff and a taste here. So, I think what I'm getting in this wine is really some ripe peach, yellow apple on the nose, some apricot tartness, and a bit of baking spice on the palate. But what's really interesting to me about this wine is that there's some creaminess and richness texturally, but also this very crisp mineral acidity that keeps the wine lifted. So this is a wine that really strikes me as being super versatile, both for Chardonnay lovers as well as the everything but Chardonnay drinkers, but also a great food wine. So I wanted to ask you, Laura, how do you think about this wine and the role it plays in people's lives?
Well, I have to say that this is the wine that if I take, as a gift to somebody for, a potluck or something, it gets drunk immediately because it's just a wine that people love. It's very drinkable, like you said. It has a really sort of friendly profile, but it's rich and mineral at the same time. It has that mix that is so attractive, but not always easy to achieve. And I think really has to do with the cool climate at the high altitude. We were joking at the beginning about white, hot whites, that actually you want cool climate for great white wine. And, at 4,000, 5,000 feet elevation, it's quite cool. You also have these limestone soils. So but again, like my dad says, we got lucky. There is this very special place at high altitude in Argentina where you can make Chardonnay that has, this kind of quintessential, Grand Cru level Chardonnay quality, which is, the freshness, the aromatics, the minerality, and also some texture. And, one thing that most people wouldn't do with this wine, but that I love to do is to age it. So we recently actually did some old vintage tastings and we're drinking, the 2004, 2006 of this wine, and it's just unbelievable. 20-year-old Chardonnay. We were also drinking the 2016. So, yeah, I just love this wine. And it is exciting, this white wine trend that hopefully some people will rediscover these wines that have actually been in the market for a very long time. Interestingly though, we actually sell a lot of Chardonnay from Catena, and actually somebody sent me the statistic that actually Catena Chardonnay is the number two most sold Chardonnay over $19 retail in the US from
Oh, wow.
imports, not,
Yeah.
not comparing. I mean, obviously California, US Chardonnay is number one. That of the imports, there's actually Latour from Burgundy is number one at like $30, and then our Catena Chardonnay. I thought that was really interesting because I didn't even imagine that, people were buying actually so little imported Chardonnay.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about the food pairing and
Oh, food pairing.
pairability of this wine.
Yes.
So, what would you
Yeah.
recommend pairing this with?
Yeah. So I agree with what you said, that it's very versatile. So one of my favorite pairings are empanadas. So I don't know how many of you have been to Argentina, but you walk into Argentina, into the airport, and you should buy an empanada. They're good almost all places. And it's basically a little different than some empanadas from other Latin American countries. So the crust is very fluffy. We often use lard for the crust. So it's quite fatty, and I like my crust fatty, let's go ahead and have something delicious. And then inside you can do many different kind of flavors, but the classic is actually ground or cut up meat, not very spicy, mostly just, grilled with onions. And you basically cook the whole empanada, you make it and you cook it in the oven or you fry it. And this wine with a meat empanada is insane. There's something about, the the breaded, that kind of like, the crust that's flaky and buttery, and the meat, and you always put a little onions. And so, that's something you wouldn't think of traditionally. I probably would not have this with steak. And then obviously the traditional pairings, but I would have this with any kind of pasta. If you want to have it with pasta with sausage, perfect.
Yeah,
Red sauce, probably not, but any kind of white sauce. And obviously fish and scallops. And I mean, scallops, my husband is obsessed with scallops. And this is the wine that we always pair traditionally. And Thanksgiving,
yeah.
this is the
Oh,
wine. We
great
always
choice.
have a bottle of this wine for Thanksgiving with turkey. And it also goes well when you do, cranberry. So you do that kind of mix with the sweetness. This wine goes really well. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Well, you mentioned Burgundy, and I want to dive into that a little bit. So, your father wanted to make Chardonnay in Argentina at the level of great Burgundy wines.
Yeah.
So, why did that lead him to search, high altitude, especially the
Yeah.
Uco Valley?
Yeah, yeah. So most of the vineyards in Argentina, before my father started this revolution, were either to the east of Mendoza, that's, around 700 meters, so, under 3,000 feet elevation, or near the town, the center of town, because the railroad was passing through there, and most of the wine was being sent from Mendoza to Buenos Aires, our capital. So the Uco Valley had a few vineyards. There was no still wine Chardonnay planted in Gualtallarí, which is, the famous location of the Adriana vineyard. And the Catena Alta is a blend of Adriana and Domingo vineyard, so around 80% Adriana, 20% Domingo. Domingo is a very rocky soil, and it gives that extra creaminess. Adriana tends to be really mineral and linear, and it's super amazing wine. We have the white bones and the white stones from there. But when you want just a touch of more body and more roundness, we use a little bit of Domingo, which is around 4,000 feet elevation. So the high altitude is basically colder. So that's important. We have a lot of sunlight. So we have to be careful, not to over prune the vines. And, we like kind of generous canopies that will shield the grapes from too much sun. But it's usually not an issue. We don't have to do too much to the vineyard, just sort of naturally it adapts. But sometimes you have soils that are really rocky, and so the vines will be less vigorous, and that's where we have to be careful with the pruning.
Yeah.
So basically, this place is cool climate, high altitude, limestone soils, very well drained, and it's just phenomenal for high quality Chardonnay. And my father basically chose it because it was cool, and he was actually the first to bring Dijon clones of Chardonnay to Argentina. We also have Massal selections that have been in Argentina. Probably, we don't know the exact history, but pre-phylloxera, and we're actually studying that right now. But in Adriana Vineyard, the Catena Alta that you're drinking right now is from a series of Dijon clones that we were the first to bring to plant there in this high altitude region.
Nice, nice. Okay, so now let's move from Chardonnay history to Chardonnay innovation, which is,
And
we're
I'm bringing
here
it really
today, like one
close.
of the, yeah, one of the first people in the US to be able to try the number seven Uco stones. And what strikes me is how complete this wine feels at 7%. So,
Yeah.
I get apple and pear and delicate white flowers. I get some tropical notes on the palate. And you may be able to see these. I've had it poured a little bit here for a while, but you may be able to see the bubbles. There's definitely bubbles there. And so I think it's a wine that has a little bit of like the tropical notes, but it stays really bright and lifted because of the acidity and the bubbles. And as Corrine mentioned, I taste tons and tons of products, and more and more, lower alc wines. And this is, I think, if you poured this for me, I would not think it was a low alc wine. Like I had to look at the label again. So,
Oh
tell
my God,
me,
that's awesome. I love to hear
yeah.
that.
I mean, true. I taste a lot of things. So,
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear more about how you built that sense of flavor and texture and freshness at the lower alcohol level.
Yeah. Well, first of all, as Corinne mentioned at the beginning, when we started tackling this no low category, what I told the team was, unless these are amazing, maybe they don't have to be as good as a glass of wine, but they have to be at least 80% as good as a good wine. If we can't get to that level, I am not interested. So we started all this research and development with no alcohol, dealcoholizing, and then also creating some products with botanicals. And then this is our version of, you know, 7%, so, about half the alcohol. And the concept was, can we make something incredibly delicious? Because what I had in the market, and I think the market is still filled with some really not delicious no and low products, was so bad that I said, is it even possible to do something delicious? And so the team was working on that. And Agustin Silva is the winemaker in charge, and my son Dante is working on the consumer experience, which is cool because he's only 24 years old, so he knows a lot about the new generations. And he's grown up in a wine family, so he worked at the winery when he was younger. He knows about wine, but between the two of them, they their brains are completely open, right? But they're working with the Catena Institute team that has, really senior winemakers. There's Roy Urbieta, who is probably Argentina's #1 sensory analysis person. He trained with Hildegard Heyman at UC Davis. So what they were trying to do was, okay, can we get Chardonnay aromatics? And can we make this wine not too sweet? Because one of the issues we found with a lot of the no low wines is that the sweetness tasted artificial. And, most of us do not want to have, a bunch of sugar, even if it's natural sugar. So what we discovered was that actually by using the best quality grapes, we got a much better product. And we use 100% natural ingredients. So we have no additives to this wine. It has sulfites, but it has only the things that we would normally use with wine. And in terms of the bubbles, we thought that the wine tasted a lot better with some bubbles. So it doesn't have as much bubbles as you would have in a bottle of champagne, let's say, but it has enough bubbles to lift it. And to me, that is why it's delicious. Now, does it have more, residual sugar than a normal still wine? Yes, a little more because it's basically a mix of highest quality Chardonnay wine, highest quality verjuice, and must, all from Chardonnay. So we basically did tons of experimentation, like trying everything, like 10% of this and 5% of that and 1% of this. And then this is what came out. And we have Uco stones and Uco mineral. Uco stones has a little more must. Uco mineral has a little more verjuice. And so it was just a lot of experimentation, but with the idea of getting as close as we could to wine. And so like the fact that you, somebody so experienced, thought it was full alcohol, that is basically all my dreams come true.
Nice. I love it. Well, let's talk about occasions because I want to understand where is it that you see this wine fitting into people's lives?
Yeah, so this is my weekday wine for me, but I see it fitting into many other places. But I want to tell you how I drink it. So I like to have two glasses of something. And, I'm a doctor. I talk a lot about wine and health. I have my website in defense of wine. And really, the literature would support for a woman no more than a glass of wine per day. So, how do I get my two glasses? And this is a way to get my two glasses. So I can have one when I get home and I'm cooking dinner, I drink my glass, and then I can have another glass with dinner. So that's something that for me works really well. And I think though it's also really good, if you have guests coming over and when you go to a party and they have champagne. And by the time you get to the meal, you've had way too much champagne. And I am really disciplined about alcohol. I try really hard not to ever drink too much. But if somebody's offering you champagne, you just drink it. And then nobody has the water anywhere. And you're like, where's the water? And you have to like go get it. Sometimes I've gone to the bathroom with a water bottle. I tell you to find water because at a lot of wine events, they don't have water easily available. And so for me, this is that wine that people walk in and you give them this, and so they have two glasses of this, and they just had one glass of sparkling, the equivalent to one glass. So I think that's another use. And in terms of pairing, I think it's very versatile because, like you said, it's not that different. So, one thing that is not as good with regular, I mean, not regular, but normal Chardonnay than this is because of the touch of sweetness that comes from the must and the verjuice. I think this works better with cheese than, how cheese often goes with a sweet wine. And so
Yeah.
this actually goes incredibly well with cheese and crackers. So I also think it's very good for if you're having a reception and you're not having a ton of food and you're just having, a cheese platter and some fruit. I think this would be particularly good. Yeah,
Yeah, I can also see it on picnic blankets in Central Park and all sorts of
absolutely.
summer entertaining
Yes,
and,
yes,
weeknight meals. I mean, I think that
yeah,
the ability to have something lower alc that still has
uh,
the sensation of a
yeah,
full alc wine is really
yeah,
something that,
yeah,
a lot of brands have been trying to get to. Because as you said, I think there's just a lot of sort of unusual sugar ideas, and then there's a lot of bitter flavors. There's so many things that
yeah.
happen in a lot of the wines that I've tasted through that did not happen here. So that's really
Oh, thank
exciting.
you. It's a lot of work at the Catena Institute with the team there. I mean, it's just trial and error, constant experimentation. So it's not easy to get to this wine, by the way. It is at this point a lot easier to make a great still wine with the usual alcohol, 12 to 13.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one thing I love about this story is that it feels really full circle. So, your mother helped introduce Catena Chardonnay in the US, and now this lower alcohol Chardonnay project is named for her. So, can you
Yeah.
talk about that
Yeah.
personal connection there?
Yeah. Well, so actually my mom said to us, hey, as I get older, I can't drink that much. I've heard of these no alcohol wines, and I really still would rather have wine, but can you make me something delicious? And she is a huge fan of the whole No Low project. And we said, why don't we name it after her, Elena de Mendoza? And we happen to have this trademark, and her name is Elena, and Mendoza is our region. So, her last name is actually Massa. So it's actually kind of cool because it's the same initial of her last name, but the brand is Elena de Mendoza. And yeah, it's kind of fun that full circle. I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, if there's one thing really that you want people to remember about Catena and Chardonnay after this conversation, what are the key takeaways that they should recall?
Yeah, so I'd like them to remember that cool climate, high altitude mountain Chardonnay is a different category. So, it's different than California. It's perhaps more similar to Burgundy, but it's not Burgundy, depending on other factors. So I want them to discover cool climate Chardonnay from Argentina, mountain Chardonnay, and just see what they think about it. So that's about Chardonnay, and I think our region is very well suited for Chardonnay. It's kind of like you think Oregon Pinot Noir. I think you should think cool climate Uco Valley Chardonnay, and that's probably not
Mhm.
in most people's brains. So
Yeah.
or Cabernet Napa Valley. To me, high altitude Mendoza Chardonnay. I mean, in Argentina, everybody thinks that because, we drink a lot of our own wine. So that, and then in terms of the no lope wines, I think that, a lot of people, are thinking, oh, I want to cut down. I think that it's very easy today to do what we call zebra striping. And we have a podcast, Dante and I, my son and I. And basically, you can do this low alcohol version. You could do no alcohol and then some alcohol. But today, I think with a lot of the creativity that's happening in the higher level of wines in the no low category, that is going to keep on improving for the next 5 years. There's so many options if you want to drink less, and it's up to you how much you drink, but I think it's very possible to have the same kind of high quality flavors and to drink less through either no low or through zebra striping.
Yeah, yeah. And I know we only have a couple minutes left, but I think one of the things that I really took away from researching Catena's Chardonnays is truly the breadth of the portfolio. You have the white stones and the white bones, and then it continues along down the line. You have the new innovation products. Can you talk about the breadth of the portfolio of Chardonnay, just so people have a sense
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah, yeah.
what's available?
Yeah. So there's the Catena Classic that it says high mountain vines on the label, and I mean, it's around $20. We put our best grapes in that. It's so good. And it's usually a blend of three different vineyards at different altitudes. So you get the minerality, the texture, you kind of get everything in a glass. Then you have the Catena Alta, which we had today. And then you have the Adriana White Stones and White Bones, which are, very limited production, 1.5 hectares, like less than 3 acres. And like one of them is super herbaceous. The other one is, more stony, and they've gotten, 100 points, and they're always in, these like top wines of Argentina or South America listings. And then we have the low alcohol and that the number 7, the Uco stones and Uco mineral. And then we also have the Chardonnay infused with botanicals, EDM, blonde, and brunette. So that would be the range. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And can you just say for people who are learning about the blonde and brunette, can you just describe those quickly?
Yeah.
And then
Yes.
we'll wrap up, I promise.
Yeah, so those are zero alcohol. So one of them has zero 0.5, which is, like a ripe banana or kombucha. And then one is actually currently, initially was zero 0.3 and now it's 0.0, the blonde. And so they're basically verjuice, which is early harvest grape, must, which is, high quality Chardonnay, and some botanicals. And to me, the key difference between our products and many others is that we're using the best quality grapes that would go into the best quality wines. A lot of people are thinking, oh, if I'm not going to ferment it, I might as well use lesser quality grapes. That's, to me, it's a huge mistake if you're trying to make something very good. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating for me from the, journalism perspective, just to see the range of from tradition and deep tradition, like all the way through innovation. I think it's really exciting to see how Catena is exploring all the frontiers of the way consumers' taste and occasionality are evolving. So thank you so much for making time to
Thank
talk with
you.
us.